Hi, I'm Femi OK. It has been exactly a week since the veteran Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed by Israeli forces. Her murder has been condemned around the world, but who will be held accountable for Shireen's death? That is the focus of our conversation today. We're joined by Mona, by Dana and Jalal, friends of the stream. I wish it was under better circumstances that we'll all come together, but I do want you to remind our audience who you are and what you do. Mona, welcome back.
Thanks, Femi, for the introduction. My name is Mona Shtaye. I'm the advocacy advisor of Hamle, the Arab Center of Social Media, of the Advancement of Social Media. I'm also MA candidate at the University of Westminster, doing my MA in Social Media and Digital Communication.
So good to have your expertise on today's discussion. Dana, welcome back to the stream. Please remind our audience who you are and what you do.
My name is Dana El-Kurd. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Richmond. Yeah, unfortunately, this is my expertise.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. And Jalal, good to see you once more on the stream. Remind our stream audience who you are and what you do.
Good to see you too, Femi. My name is Jalal Abu Khater, and I'm a concerned Palestinian who happens to live in Jerusalem. And I describe myself as a writer. Thank you for having us again.
All right, so you've met your panel audience. If you're on YouTube right now, your comments, your questions, how has the past week gone for you in terms of Shireen Abu Akleh's murder? What do you want to talk about? What is resonating with you? Put your conversation, your questions right here and be part of today's show. Jalal, is there a headline right now that is jumping out at you that you feel that you need to unpack for our international audience? I've got a couple of thoughts, but I'm really wondering what you're seeing down on the ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a headline, and it's the fact that a week later, a week after this, the horrible, horrific images we've seen, the killing of Shireen and the funeral processions and everything we've seen, all the loudness that we've witnessed, and Israeli authorities have the rudeness and the gall to go and arrest the main pallbearer who was holding Shireen's coffin at the entrance to the French hospital in Jerusalem. This guy went viral in Palestinian media as being the guy who was holding onto the pole to the coffin of Shireen, and he sustained so much beating by the Israeli forces, and his picture went viral. Like, this guy showed so much strength in just making sure this coffin does not fall over, and he gave all his energy to protect that coffin. He was being beaten, he was not resisting in any way, just attacked, and they've arrested him. And they claim his arrest has nothing to do with the funeral, but the interrogators have been asking about the funeral repeatedly, and they've put him in solitary confinement, asking him why was he insisting on maintaining his grip on the coffin. That's what the Israeli interrogators are.
Yeah, we're watching this, Jalal, right now. This is Abu Akleh.
This is him.
And he's holding his head. I'm explaining what everyone's seeing, but just so you can see this. Holding his head, trying to carry the coffin at the same time. And he's been arrested for what exactly, Jalal?
Basically, what the Israelis are saying, that his arrest has nothing to do with the funeral procession, but rather his associations or his communications with banned groups or terrorist groups, what they've described. It's, of course, a very baseless accusation that we've seen in Jerusalem being used against a lot of those who are active and those who are vocal in the street, including Murad Atiyeh from Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, who spent 16 months who spent over 6 months in prison because of this false accusation of communications, only to take him off the street. What they're doing to this guy, Amr Abu Khadir, is punishment for his steadfastness in holding the coffin. They're punishing our hero. Every social media page that I know have shared a picture of this guy and showed this is the person himself. We are interviewing him because his strength was inspiring to so many, and they wanted to crush that one person. So they went, arrested him, are interrogating him, and have him now in solitary confinement in a small cell where he can't even recognize what time it is outside. That was what they decided to do to this person, Amr Abu Khadir.
Mona, go ahead.
Thanks, Femi. Actually, I'll cover much more about the digital rights and the digital sphere because, this is my expertise. Basically, we saw how Israelis are trying to change the narrative and to dominate it. Their hegemony on the digital sphere usually they are utilizing that using it just to dominate the narrative there and to take down the Palestinian narrative or to take it down or to hide the Palestinian narrative, let's say. And when it comes to Shireen Abu Akleh, first thing happened when she was shot by the Israeli soldier is they said she was shot by a Palestinian gunman, and we've heard.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, yes, they questioned it.
Yeah, so basically, we've heard from eyewitnesses, people who like her colleague Shada Hanaisha and others there in the field, when they basically said that she was shot by the Israeli soldiers. We saw that video that documented that, and then the Israelis tried to.
So, Mona, I hear that. It's quite a complicated setup to explain because of the obfuscation, okay? Because it's Israel deliberately trying to, or it appears to be that they're deliberately trying to confuse what we actually saw and what we actually know. So my colleague, Sandra Gaffman, is part of the digital series called Start Here. And she basically laid out the investigations and where the narrative was changed. Dana, I want you to have a listen to this and then respond immediately afterwards. Here's Sandra.
It appears likely that armed Palestinians who were firing indiscriminately at the time were responsible, and offered up a video of Palestinian gunmen in the area. But an Al Jazeera investigation examined the location of that video and concluded the gunshots fired in it were not connected to Shireen's death. The Israeli rights group B'Tselem also examined the video and came to the same conclusion. The investigative organization Bellingcat later published a more detailed analysis using other publicly available data. They worked out that Shireen was here, the Israeli army was here, and that Palestinian gunmen were also in the area, here.
So that's a further distance. It's a much more obstructed line of sight to the spot where this tragic killing took place.
Bellingcat's conclusion is that the available video evidence does not provide good grounds to doubt the accounts of the journalists on the scene. Indeed, it appears to support them.
Yeah, I mean, it should be enough that the journalists that were providing eyewitness testimony, saw what happened and said that this is, a targeted shooting and that they were not near any other armed factions. But the fact that all of these organizations have now confirmed, whether it's Al Jazeera, B'Tselem, Bellingcat, all of the ones that were mentioned, just goes to show that obfuscation is clearly, it's very blatantly a strategy. They've used this before with Muhammad al-Durra. They've used this since. And that's why I think that they lost that first round of the discourse online, because people could see. And these videos went viral. Whereas, they can't really fight that narrative anymore. Now they're switching it up. Yeah. Now they're saying something different about what happened with Shireen. Even if it was a tragic mistake, they're claiming, it is anti-Semitic to focus on it because journalists die everywhere. So why are we focusing on just Israel's shooting of this particular journalist? And you see that also in the... Oh, yeah, go ahead, Shada.
I want to support you on this point, Dana. I noticed the first reaction of the Israeli state on the morning when Shireen was killed. They put all their energy. Then the Prime Minister of Israel, including the Foreign Ministry and the Foreign Minister of Israel, they all tweeted out the same video trying to muddy the waters. That's what they did in the first few hours. It was obviously a very coordinated strategy to distort the news as fast as possible. That was last week, Wednesday morning.
Jalal, can
Today,
I
add? Their strategy is to call it anti-Semitism.
All right, Jalal, may I add something just to support your point? Not that you need extra support from me, but I'm going to bring it in from Dina Takuri, who's one of my colleagues at AJ+. And she basically shows the tactics, the strategy, very bold, very open, very transparent. Take a look.
The Israeli government knows how to use its statements to manipulate mainstream media. An official even took credit for their, quote, PR blitz, saying they had successfully influenced the Associated Press and BBC's coverage to cast doubt over who had killed Shireen.
Jalal, please continue. Go ahead.
My conclusion was to take your attention to today, where the Israeli official government, the envoy for anti-Semitism, she was newly appointed to combat anti-Semitism by the Israeli government. And today she came out with a message, obviously another part of their coordinated distortion campaign. And she is saying that the International Federation of Journalists documented over 2,000 journalists killed over the last year. She questions why people are not talking about all those journalists but have chosen Shireen. And she accuses people who are talking about Shireen of being anti-Semitic. She did that in a very weird video that I just saw a couple of hours ago. Yeah. That is the official envoy for the Israeli government to combat anti-Semitism. She's accusing us of being anti-Semitic for our grief over Shireen. That's their strategy right now.
Right, and I think, I apologize. Go ahead.
No need to apologize. You are my guest. Dana, you go first, I go second. I have YouTube commenters who also want to talk about Shireen. Dana, you go first, and then I'm going to ask you, all of you, to help me out with some of the questions our audience have and they want to ask you straight away. Dana, please continue.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect what's happening with Shireen Abu Akleh's murder with a broader strategy, I think, with the pro-Israel kind of milieu or certain lobbies and groups, particularly in Western countries, and I can speak to the United States. They know that they're losing the battle over the discourse because these images speak louder than any kind of propaganda can. So they are making a very direct and clear shift to these accusations of anti-Semitism.
Okay.
We're seeing it particularly with Shireen, but this is a broader context.
All right, let me open up the conversation, guests, to our audience as well. Jalal, let me give this to you. Was this a premeditated assassination? If so, why not, instead of investigating the sniper, hold the ones who issued the order to account? Jalal, just very briefly, go ahead.
I don't think there's any evidence to point to a targeted beyond the fact that they were targeted as journalists. There is no evidence for this to be premeditated where Shireen Abu Akleh was a target. But the fact that they've targeted journalists, in my opinion, is because the Israeli army, when they enter Jenin, especially Jenin refugee camp, they do not want any camera, because every time they go in, there are Palestinian casualties. Every time there are Palestinians who are killed. So their violence is extremely brutal and lethal in Jenin, and they wanted to target anyone who was there, especially those documenting. An Israeli spokesperson for the military, or a big chief in the military, has said that they are armed with cameras. Don't you think?
I remember
they
that.
are armed with cameras. That's how they see journalists who are covering Jenin. So yes,
Okay.
If I may
targeted
jump
killing
in.
of a journalist. Yeah.
If I may jump in on the same video that you showed us, Femi, like a few minutes ago, we have at Hamlet Center reported that video for Facebook to highlight that as a disinformation and propaganda from the Israeli government, because they usually use the social media platforms to spread their propaganda and the disinformation, to cover also what they are usually spreading all over the digital spaces. And the only thing that we've heard from Meta is this video did not violate their community standards. While when we Palestinians are documenting the human rights violations that we are exposed to on the ground and sharing that on the social media, they repeatedly have been taken down because under their excuse or claims of violating their community standards. And we can't see this we can see this as a part of the systematic efforts, or part of the systematic efforts that usually seeks to silence Palestinian voices in the digital spaces. And the killing of the veteran American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh is part of that. Usually Israel, they seek to create the chilling effect. So whenever they feel that there are vocal activists, vocal journalists, vocal people, or anything on the ground, they usually interrogate us, they surveil us, they arrest us, and sometimes they sentence us for months. And therefore, they did that for Shireen because they know Shireen is is a family member. We felt that we lost a family member because she's part of our childhood memory. And they intended to do that with Shireen because they want us to have, or to scare us.
Okay.
They want to terrify us and to have this kind of chilling effect more and more.
Okay, Mona, so one of the things that I said that we wanted to do at the very beginning of this show was 1 week after Shireen's murder, who will be held accountable? On YouTube, Corwin says the simple truth is no one will be held accountable. But a few hours ago, we spoke to the human rights attorney, Noura Erakat, and this is what she told us. Have a listen, have a look.
Accountability for the murder, the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh would look like a thorough, impartial investigation that not only incriminated one single soldier who fired the shot, the precision shot that went into her head, but the entire system that facilitated this process. There was a general who okayed the kill. There was a legal advisor who said that it was legal. And there was a system that enabled the Israeli occupation forces to be in Jenin, where they should not be, on lands they should not be on at all, to be terrorizing the entire Palestinian population living there. This is a system of apartheid, and Shireen is one of its many victims and one of its cruelest murders.
Yes, let's talk about accountability in some detail. The system has to be held accountable, not the person who pulled the trigger. Dana, you start.
Yeah, I think that Dr. Haaretz is correct, and especially given that Shireen's kind of positionality is that she is a holder of an American citizenship. Shooting a journalist is a war crime under U.S. law. There is some talk. I read recently on The Intercept some reporting that there is a letter circulating in Congress amongst Democratic Congresspeople calling for an FBI investigation and sending it to Secretary Blinken. But I don't know how far that's going to go. Not to say that the American, intervention is going to be all and end all, but in an ideal world, like, this should have consequences between the United States and Israel.
It should have consequences. What have you seen, Jalal, so far?
It definitely should have consequences, and there is no faith in any way in the Israeli investigation. There's never been faith, and there is no more faith. Shireen, let us not forget that Shireen, only last month there was a report by the IFJ, the International Federation of Journalists, that said at least 46 Palestinian journalists in Palestine were killed by Israeli targeting since the year 2000, and no one has been held accountable, okay? Shireen is not the first. There have been 46 without anyone being held accountable by Israeli forces. Okay, so basically, even Beit Salem, Israeli human rights group, they had a report maybe 6-7 years ago. It's called, I think, Fig Leaf, the occupation's Fig Leaf, where they say they stopped dealing at all with any Israeli court or legal institution because they don't want to give a fig leaf to this occupation and whitewash the crimes, because the whole system is built to cover up for those crimes. That's what Beit Salem said. They said the system assists in whitewashing those crimes. Therefore, there is no faith in the legal investigations conducted by Israel.
All right, so I am wondering, this was a moment for all Palestinians when they just stopped and paused because of Shireen's legacy, her reporting. I remember when I grew up with a journalist, and we all used to pretend to be that journalist and do the same sign-off. She was that journalist where you would pretend that you were that Al Jazeera journalist signing off, doing that incredible reporting. She influenced generations. So I am wondering where her murder falls in the history of the occupation of Palestine. Is it a milestone? Is there something here that will change? Will there be a date where people always remember the date that she died? There's nodding, there's this. So let me just go around all of you, because obviously you're all going to have different takes on this.
I'll just be very brief
Jalal,
in saying
go ahead.
They've murdered a collective memory of the Palestinian people. That's what they've murdered in murdering Shireen. I'll let the others give their opinions.
Dana.
Yeah, so interestingly, I think you have today on this show people who are about the same age. We remember Shireen Abu Akleh from the Second Intifada, her reporting on the Second Intifada when we were children. And her death is a blow. But I think it is kind of I mean, it's coincidental, but the fact that it comes a year after the Unity Intifada, and we saw huge mobilizations in Jerusalem, joined by people from outside Jerusalem, Palestinians from outside Jerusalem as well. Perhaps her death doesn't need to be in vain. It helped mobilize Palestinians once again. And I think that this is gonna, I'm not saying that this is a critical juncture, but it is definitely a milestone in pushing the Palestinians forward on this path to a unified mobilization.
Mona?
It is a milestone. Like, I remember when we were like all children, we have this dream. We want to grow up and we want to be like Shireen Abu Akleh. We want to be Shireen Abu Akleh at Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine. All of us have this. Yeah, all of us have repeated this sentence like repeatedly when we were younger. And I feel like, yeah, it is a milestone, but we should build on that. Last year in the May uprising, we have like 2 weeks of Palestinian cause was re-centralized, was trending, and then everything like was almost calmed down, but the occupation never ends. Apartheid never ends. We are living under systematic oppression from this government from this regime who's hugely discriminating systematically against us Palestinians everywhere. And because of that, it should be a milestone, but we should build on that to have this kind of we should hold them accountable. Shireen Abu Akleh, she is a journalist, but also other Palestinians should not be shot just because they are Palestinians. We have the right to live in our lands. Should be a milestone, but it's also we should build on that for a longer term, for a longer term work.
I want to bring in one more voice, and this is the voice of Mark Owen Jones, who we spoke to a few hours ago, with some practical advice about how do we cover situations like Shireen Abu Akleh's killing. Because as we were watching other media outlets, other people talking about her murder, they were talking about it in a way that was different than if she hadn't been a Palestinian, it appears. This is what Mark had to say to us earlier.
Israel like to weaponize doubt. In other words, what they want to do is try and muddy the water of international public opinion. In this case, they tried to say that when they killed Shireen Abu Akleh, that it was the Palestinians who did it. And they want to do this as soon as possible. And in a way, they were successful because international news organizations like the New York Times, BBC, and The Guardian put Israel's side of the story pretty high up in their reporting. However, I think people are getting savvier about Israel as an occupying and apartheid state and are increasingly doubting their official narratives. What we need now is for news media to have a different set of rules when reporting the narrative of an occupying and apartheid state.
Mona is vigorously nodding. Articulate your vigorous nod, Mona.
Basically, what Israel is doing is continuing their digital militarism since the social media platforms started. They are trying to militarize and securitize these spaces. Their narrative and their propaganda, their diaspora, when it's online, they are militarizing those spaces. When also they are moving the online documentation to arrest people, or they are taking advantage of the online documentations to arrest people, as Jalal mentioned at the beginning, for that man who just was holding Shireen's casket. Then they are linking the online and the offline. They are linking or using or taking advantage of our documentation of their human rights violations to arrest us and to silence us. Then they are working systematically to militarize the digital spaces. And because of that, we Palestinians should think more how we are using social media platforms. And we should build with our allies and the pro-Palestinians all around the world and other progressive movements to put pressure on the social media companies to stop doing that,
Mona,
or to stop.
Thank you. You got the last word in this conversation. Thank you for being in it. Dana, Jalal, we appreciate your take 1 week after the murder of our Al Jazeera colleague, Shireen Abu Akleh. I'm going to end here with Ghassan Slim, who is on YouTube right now. The saddest part about Shireen's murder is that she'll be forgotten, not because we don't care about her, but because sadly it's daily life. Every day we lose people, that's the life under occupation. We definitely, in Al Jazeera, will not forget our family member. Thank you for being part of today's show. I'll see you next time. Take care.